صباح الخير جميعا. Good morning everyone. أنا مبسوط جدا إن أشوفكم النهاردة وأتعرف عليكم أو أتليست تعرفوا عليا. أنا اسمي عمر الحمامسي وهبتدي النهاردة معاكم إن شاء الله مشوار مع أوراسكوم للتنمية. هبتدي النهاردة هتكلم شوية بالعربي في الأول وبعد شوية هقلب على بالإنجليزي على أساس إنه زمايلنا في البلاد المختلفة وحتى اللي في مصر بس مش ما بيتكلموش عربي يمكن يعرفوا يتابعوا معانا، وإن شاء الله برضه هنديكوا نسخة من الفيديو ده هيكون مترجم ونقدر نشوفه بعد في خلال كام يوم. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to use the opportunity of joining Orascom Development Holding to address you today on my very first day here. I wanted to use the opportunity to do a few things. The first one is to introduce myself to the Orascom family, to the Orascom Development family. The second thing is to share with you a little bit of my initial impressions and what I've seen in Orascom so far and that I've been very impressed with. The third thing is talk a little bit about why I decided to join ODH and the excitement that I have towards ODH today. And then I will put a few asks to you, a few questions that I have for you that I hope over the course of the next few weeks and months we can cover together. And ultimately, we will open it up to some questions and answers. And I'm joined here by Alea from the HR side, who will be our kind moderator and will be taking in all your questions and trying to group them. And happy to have any questions you have. And I think that the Q&A is open so people can actually publish their questions. I think you can type them in there. فبالعربي على السريع على الحته دي احنا هنتكلم على انا هديكم يعني نبذه سريعه على مسيرتي الشخصيه وبعد كده اكلمكم شويه عن ليه انضميت لاوراسكوم للتنميه وبعدين هتكلم شويه على حبه الحاجات اللي انا شفتها لحد دلوقتي اللي فعلا يعني عجبتني في اوراسكوم لحد دلوقتي وبعدين نفتح الدسكشن هنا على اي اسئله تكون عندكم. الاسئله كلها هتكون بدون اسم اي حد فممكن تسالوا اللي انتم عايزينه وعليا موجوده هنا جنبي هتكون هي اللي هتجمع الاسئله دي كلها وتحطها لنا. فبليز خليكم يعني اسالوا كل الاسئله اللي انتم عايزينها. I'll shift back to English and we'll continue all the way through to English and we'll have the translation hopefully soon in the next version. So, and again, just a reminder that the questions you pose will all be anonymous, and so feel free to ask any questions that you have, and please don't hesitate. I'll attempt to address everything I can. I probably won't have answers to everything you ask, but feel free to ask all the questions you want. Let me say a few words about myself. I'm obviously Egyptian. I was born in this country, which I lived in for about 1/3 of my life. I traveled quite a bit throughout my life. I lived in Egypt for about a total of 15 years, and the remaining roughly 30 years of my life I've been abroad. I lived in places like France, where I did a big chunk of my high school education. I lived in Canada, where I did a chunk of my initial university education. And then I lived in the US, where I did also the second chunk of my university education, as well as working there. I worked there for about 6 years. I'll give some more of these details in a minute. And then I've been living in the Middle East, particularly out of Dubai, but serving the entire Middle East region or working in the entire Middle East region for over 15 years. So I've been around a little bit, and that's something that always attracted me was how do I come back to Egypt and try to make something that is really exciting and something that's really great in my country and try to give back to my home. My background is frankly a reasonably traditional one. I studied always kind of math and science. At high school, and then at university, I studied engineering. I initially started in mechanical engineering, where I did a couple of years, and then shifted over to electrical engineering, which is ultimately where I did my undergraduate and my graduate studies, and very happily done that. I then started working as initially a computer scientist. I was a software programmer, working in a company called CAE, where we were writing software for aircraft and aircraft simulators. I then joined an American company in the US called AT&T, which many of you I suspect may know, and I joined their research and development branch. It was called Bell Labs at the time, and it's where we had a lot of pride in developing real engineering systems at a very high level of complexity. Bell Labs was also the place where the transistor was invented. Bell Labs was a place that had many long-term scientific discoveries that were made, and that prided itself on a lot of product design, prided itself on a lot of engineering and creative innovation. And that was something that I truly cherished. I worked there as an electrical engineer, started initially by designing what's called ASICs, which are chips that go into your computer systems and your phone systems, and ultimately became a manager of a group that was in charge of developing algorithms and developing more chips for 3G at the time, which was very advanced communications, and eventually I finished with them. When I decided to move away from the engineering side of things to the more management and business side of things, I thought that a good place to be, given that I did not have an MBA at the time, was somewhere like McKinsey & Company, which is a management consulting firm. So I joined McKinsey as an associate, which is your entry-level position, sometime in the 2002 timeframe. And I've been with McKinsey for 18 and a half years. In fact, yesterday was my very last day at McKinsey, and today is my very first day at ODH. So haven't had much of a break in between, but what I can tell you is that the last 18 and a half years that I had with McKinsey were amazing years. They were amazing because I got to learn tremendously. I had the opportunity to work across a whole range of geographies, a whole range of sectors, and a whole range of functions. I started out in the Dubai office, but very quickly transferred to the Brussels office in Europe. Spent quite a bit of time in Europe working in different European capitals and different European countries, sorry. And then also did a bunch of work in the US, particularly on the West Coast. The West Coast is a special place also for me because that's also where I met my wife, who is also Egyptian, but happened to be there. It's also where I went to my graduate university, and it's a place which I always cherish a lot in terms of innovation and engineering excellence, which I thought was always an important theme that I've always kept in my life. And then eventually I returned back to the Middle East with McKinsey, where I decided that I now want to give back to this region and I want to try to help this region. I ended up working in many sectors, as I said. Initially, I worked a lot in telecom and in technology. That was kind of my original background. That's what I knew. Then eventually I ventured into everything that had to do with what's called transport, logistics, and travel. Did a lot of airline work along the way. I served quite a number of governments on public sector work, and I worked a lot with consumer companies as well as banks. So everything that sells into consumers or into customers directly, I also had a reasonable exposure to and did quite a bit of work. The nature of the work that we did was across the board, everything from strategy, which you typically associate with a company like McKinsey, to organization, to sales, to marketing. Did quite a bit of operations and manufacturing, did quite a bit of finance and mergers and acquisitions, serving primarily private equity and sovereign wealth funds. The range of functions that I had the opportunity in McKinsey to cover was pretty extensive, and I genuinely enjoyed that. think I learned quite a lot in that. One of the things that I have been doing in the last few years in McKinsey has been to actually spend a lot of my time in Egypt. So I've been working and leading a lot of the McKinsey efforts in Egypt for the last roughly 4 or 5 years. And that has been very rewarding. I had the opportunity to work extensively with the government of Egypt on a number of large reform plans. I had the opportunity to work with a number of state-owned enterprises, so companies which are primarily functioning as independent entities, but in reality also having to serve and to function at the same speed and pace and constraints as the government has to. And of course, I had the opportunity to work in the private sector in Egypt also, which I thought was always very helpful. So that's been a little bit kind of my professional experience over the last 25 years, I suppose, since I graduated from university. I also am very passionate about the dimension of community service and giving back to our region here. And from quite early on in McKinsey, I got involved with an organization that's called Injaz Al-Arab. Injaz Al-Arab is the regional entity that represents or that is the branch of what's called Junior Achievements Worldwide. It's a global NGO that helps education, that helps in the space of education, helps complement the education levels that underprivileged primarily children get anywhere between K all the way to end of high school. And it's an organization where I started helping them initially in my capacity as a McKinsey partner. And then eventually I joined their board, and I've been on their board for the last roughly 12 or 13 years, and it's been absolutely incredible. Our target there has been to serve and touch about 1 million youth every year in our Middle Eastern region. We've so far reached on an annual basis about 500,000 youth, and hopefully we're well on track to helping more. And it's something I take a lot of pride in, because I believe that educating our youth and empowering our youth and eventually giving back in our communities and spending real time ourselves giving back in our communities and being very close-knit within our communities is absolutely essential to our corporate responsibility also as companies and as individuals. So that's something I've always been very passionate about: education and youth, and eventually entrepreneurship. We'll talk about that later. On a more personal front, I am married, as I mentioned earlier. My wife is Egyptian, although she also was born and lived a big chunk of her life in the US. We have been living away from Egypt for a number of years, and we're both extremely excited and extremely energized to come back to Egypt now and spend hopefully the next few years here, building something, putting our roots in, and making sure that our 3 boys, I have 3 boys between the ages of 10 and 15, that they get a really holistic education here and upbringing here, and that they reconnect very much with their roots and get to know them. So I have my hands full. I'm sure we have our hands full at work. I also have my hands full at home, but it's something that gives me tremendous joy and pride, and as we'll be sort of integrating the kids and my wife and our family back into the Egyptian community here, we look forward to this as being a holistic part of our journey. On continuing a little bit also on the personal front, I have quite a number of hobbies. I'm not sure exactly when I get to do them, but I'm pretty big on sports, not so much sports watching, but sports practicing, doing sports. I've always been doing all kinds of sports since I was a kid, ranging from football to tennis to squash to basketball to volleyball, etc. But also, very importantly, love sports that have to do with the outdoors. So we do a lot of hiking whenever we get the opportunity with the family. In the outdoors, we try to do long hikes. We try to go out and fish. I used to, as an Egyptian, I guess, I used to do these long multi-day fishing trips out in the Red Sea when we were much younger with my family. I look forward to doing more of these, inshallah, here in Egypt, especially with all the phenomenal places that we have like Guna and others. Hopefully we'll do a bunch of that. And then my real passion, my real deep passion, which you will find me unfortunately digressing and spending lots of time discussing, is flying. I caught the bug of flying when I was a very young kid living in France, and I started flying gliders at the time, so aircraft without any engines, and then eventually, gradually increased what I get to do on aircraft, and now I have the joy of occasionally flying jets and everything in between. So that's something that I'm very, very passionate about as a pilot. I love the art of flying. I love the science of flying. I love the complexity and the multifaceted aspect of flying, and I hope that I can share this passion with you on a more casual basis as we talk. I also love languages. I had the opportunity that was given to me from a very young age to learn languages pretty early on. And I had the opportunity also much later in my life to try to learn new languages. My most recent one, and please do not test me on it because it's pretty mediocre. In fact, it's very bad right now, is Mandarin, which I think is a very important language for us to know, given the importance of China going forward in life, but also a very simple language to learn. The phonetics of it are quite complicated, but the grammar of it, etc., are phenomenally simple and easy. Sorry for the long rambling, but this is a little bit who I am, and I hope it gives you a bit of a holistic picture of where I come from and what my background has been. And I'm sure that over the next few months and days and months, I hope we get to interact together, and all of this will start making sense. And I hope you find it a joyful interaction that we'll have together. I maybe wanted to touch on the second topic now of why did I accept to join ODH. I was very, very energized when I first was contacted by the Sawiris family about joining ODH, and there are three things that really got me energized. I think the first one is this idea of coming back to Egypt and helping accelerate the journey that you have been on and that you have under the leadership of Khaled, may God rest his soul, and many other leaders here from Samih to other members of the management team across the board. The journey that you have begun of turning around Orascom and getting the performance of Orascom to where it is today has been incredibly inspiring for me, has been something that I have been looking at from the outside with a lot of respect and a lot of admiration, and one which when I had the opportunity to consider really energized me tremendously. And it energized me because it's an opportunity to build what in my opinion should be, and to continue building, I should say, to accelerate the building of what will be hopefully a preeminent Egyptian multinational institution, right? And to me, each of these words is incredibly important and get me very excited when I think about it. Preeminent, because I think that Orascom Development Holding is a place that we want to make really unique, not only in its performance on the financial side, but it's also in its attractiveness to the incredible talent in the different countries, in the 7 countries in which we operate today, and also a constructive member of the communities in which it operates and it functions. That's why preeminent is important. Egyptian, because obviously it's a company that emanated out of Egypt, that is full of Egyptian leaders in it, and that it's very important that it takes and it keeps that culture at the center and at the core, if you will, of where it comes from. Multinational, because we are in 7 countries, I think we have the ambition to continue to thrive and grow our business in the region, at a regional level, and eventually, hopefully, at a global level, in a way that makes us truly a multinational company in the likes of the Microsofts of the world, or the Googles of the world, or the Totals of the world, if you want to think about it also from a European perspective. And finally, institution, because I do think that one of the important things that you have all been doing over the last few years has been to go from a highly entrepreneurial and truly admirable high growth environment to an environment where we start institutionalizing, professionalizing in a much tighter manner, all the interactions in which we have, all the processes that we have internally, etc., so that everything that we do is repeatable, everything that we do is sustainable, and everything that we eventually do doesn't hinge on individuals, but hinges on the institution. And I think this ultimately for me was a very attractive element of why ODH. The second reason for why ODH is frankly because the passion that I saw, the commitment level that I have seen, and the respect and that people have, both our customers as well as the people in our communities, for the visionary founders that we have had in ODH, is something that is absolutely convincing, critical, and I think at the core of the success of this company. And I think, and I hope, will continue to be at the core of the success of the company going forward also. The third reason is that fundamentally you have begun a turnaround program about 4 years ago, again under the leadership of Khaled, may God bless his soul and rest his soul. And I think that turnaround has been phenomenal, and the results that you've accomplished so far are absolutely fantastic, and you should be proud to celebrate those. I think for me the excitement is how do we take everything that has been built and accelerate it even further, especially in the current environment in which we are in, which we have to recognize is a very unique, difficult environment, the COVID environment, which may or may not be coupled with a very difficult macroeconomic situation on a global basis. And that's going to be critical for us to accelerate. So between these three reasons, frankly, I got very energized when I got the call to come in and have conversations about whether ODH would be a place that I would be excited to come and lead the journey with you, with all of you. And I look forward to doing all this together. Maybe I can share now as a third chapter a little bit of early reflections of what I have seen. Unfortunately, COVID hasn't been very helpful to any of us, and it's difficult to take over at a time when travel restrictions are so difficult. But I did get the opportunity to spend a little bit of time on the phone and on Zoom calls with some of the leaders of your different destinations, and I truly enjoyed those conversations. I also had a chance to go to El Gouna and spend a couple of days on the ground there and meet the full leadership team over there, and was truly impressed with everything I've seen. And did the same thing with OWest, albeit for only about a half a day. My early reflections were as follows. I think I was, as I said multiple times, very energized, very impressed with what I saw. It's incredible to think that 31 years ago or so, one person had a vision to transform or to take a piece of land on the Red Coast, on the Red Sea coast, and start building something around it. And to look at what it turned into today, I think is an incredibly impressive thing, and something that all of you, I know, are very proud of, and you absolutely should be proud of it. And it's an incredible accomplishment. I think I also started seeing, the other thing that I also noticed is there's been a strategy that you put in place a few years ago. For example, this whole dimension of going around and organizing yourselves around destinations, so that you can have synergies between the different lines of business, the real estate, the hotels, the town management. And I was very impressed, I think, with this approach. And I think it's one that seems to be working quite well for ODH. And I hope is one that we will continue building on and extracting even more synergies from, and learning from each other on, and making sure that we have best practices across. That was something that really caught my attention in the very beginning. The other thing that caught my attention also on the hotel side, for example, is all the accomplishments you've had in the last few years. A tremendous number of renovations, and I got to experience some of your hotels, for example, in El Gouna, and then some of the brand new hotels that were built very recently, despite and despite, even though we've had also the Corona part, I know that some of the renovations are continuing at a slower pace naturally, but still continuing, and that's been phenomenal. As an anecdote, it's interesting, but since I announced to my friends and partners at McKinsey that I was leaving and joining ODH, the immediate call that I get every single time is somebody calling me up saying, hey, I was at the Chedi in Andermatt and was tremendously impressed with either the Japanese restaurant or the quality of service or the finishing and the feeling that you have over there, or the cheese room. I keep getting a lot of commentary on the cheese room. I've never experienced the cheese room yet. I look forward to experiencing it, but nothing but positive feedback that I hear about the different destinations that we've had on the hotel side also. I also started looking a little bit at the numbers, and I see, for example, that the profitability levels that you had achieved on the hotel side prior to, of course, COVID kicking in was quite impressive on a global basis. And I think that's something that is very, that caught my attention. I thought was great. And the last thing I would say, and again, there's many different things, but the last thing I would say on this point that caught my attention and I was really impressed with has been the significant financial improvement that the management has accomplished over the last few years. I know it's been one of the themes that you focused on, and I know it's been one of the themes that's been an important one vis-a-vis the market, so your investors, but also vis-a-vis our employee force and our colleagues within the organization, and the fact that we have the ability not only to create great financial returns for our investors and our employees and be able to share in those benefits, I thought was something that is absolutely fantastic. So these are just some early observations, and I will be looking forward to over the next few days, weeks and months to go around the different destinations and meet, I hope, with as many as I can of you and our larger number of colleagues. I really do want to try to make the effort to meet as many of you as I can and spend hopefully some quality time with you. And as I give that as my commitment to you, again, COVID permitting, and apologies if that becomes a little bit difficult in the beginning, and maybe we do some more virtual things as we're doing now. But as we do this, I have a number of asks from you. What do I ask you? I ask you to help me think through how do we creatively and in an innovative way think through growing our business. To me, growth is going to be absolutely critical. I think it's no secret that you have been accomplishing tremendous growth. You have also managed, we have managed, I guess now that I'm on board, we have managed to grow very strongly up until the end of 2019. Some sectors, some segments, some geographies have also managed to display very strong performance during the COVID months that we've experienced so far. I will look forward to hearing your ideas and your thoughts on how do we continue on this growth trajectory and how do we innovate around the growth trajectory, particularly with everything that's going on right now. And how do we do this against the incredible land bank that we have, where we have a lot of assets that we can develop eventually and be able to monetize. The second thing I would love to hear from you is how do we become a regional and within our markets where we are a truly attractive talent magnet, if I may call it, right? How do we make sure that in every market where we operate, the best of talent is constantly thinking about joining Orascom development? And how do we make sure that that talent gets nurtured, gets trained, gets developed, gets empowered, and eventually gets in leadership positions, primarily inside our company, but eventually, and with a surplus eventually of talent that we will create over the next multiple decades, I hope, we will be a talent factory for the countries where we operate and for the regions where we operate. The third question I would like to hear your thoughts on are how do we actually take a lot of the amazing practices that we have in different destinations? How do we take the experiences of Elguna? How do we take the entrepreneurship of, let's say, the UK Ecoboss? How do we take the successes of Salalah? How do we take the uniqueness and the completely new business operating models of OWest and take those and replicate them in our different geographies and our different business units. I think those best practice sharings and learnings will be absolutely critical for us to become eventually an absolutely strong company that operates at global performance standards. The fourth question I will ask you is, how do we actually benefit, how do we make use as best as we can of our brand? I think today Orascom Development has a brand that stands for excellence and uniqueness. It is a very different type of a player. We're not a regular real estate player. We're certainly not a regular hotel player. We're not a normal, typical municipality or town management player. How do we create a brand around all this? How do we leverage that brand around all this to get even more excellence, to generate even more value for our shareholders and for our employee colleagues? And how do we ultimately create that brand that we can be incredibly proud of? These will be the questions that I'll be very keen to hear your thoughts on as we start meeting each other throughout this journey. And I certainly also do hope that we'll have many opportunities to have these and many more interaction opportunities and communications in two directions over the next days, weeks, and months. On this, I'm done with what I wanted to share with you directly. I'll now turn to Alaya, who's sitting right next to me and who I think has been collecting a number of questions coming your way. Alaya. Okay, so Omar, we have a few questions for you. Let's start with one that we got from our colleagues from, I'm guessing, outside of the Egypt or ODE. So we understand Egypt is the biggest contributor to the group. What's your view of other destinations? What role should they play in the future to take the group to the next level? Very good, thank you. Maybe I'll repeat the question just in case maybe it didn't get picked up. You're asking what is the, Egypt has been the biggest contributor so far to the group. It's the largest operation effectively. What is the role of the rest of the group when it comes to growth? Of course, I'm on day one, so please take all of these answers as my sort of initial incoming views on things, but I'm sure we will shape them together. I would say, in my view, it's phenomenal that Egypt has been the growth engine of this company. It's also very natural. This is where we come from. I do think that we want to eventually, if we fast forward X number of years, and I don't know if X is 3, 5, or 7, we want to see an environment where we've grown this company so much, and we've grown also the international assets that we have so much that Egypt becomes a fantastic engine, the engine that always we will call home, but it'll be an engine similar to, in size, similar to profitability, etc., to the other engines. Therefore, I guess what I'm saying in a long way, a complicated way, is we look to our international destinations to achieve similar levels of growth and profitability, hopefully on a much shorter time frame, because we've learned a whole number of lessons and we figured out a whole bunch of things in Egypt over the last 30 plus years that we can very rapidly replicate in other places, and that we should and want to make sure are happening at the international level. Okay, and another question from the initial assessment that you had throughout the 3 months. What are your initial thoughts about the 3 strategic pillars that are guiding the company direction? And do you see any changes on the short term regarding those 3 pillars? Being? The real estate, town management. And got it. Thank you. So Alaya is kindly saying that I've been already on the job for a few months. I've been on the job only for a few hours. I did get a chance to meet some of you and of course read a lot of material, both that's available publicly and also a little bit more. Look, my view is simple. You have built this company, and I have the privilege of now joining you on this journey on the back of those 3 sectors: real estate, hotels, and then I think more recently the monetization or the recognition of town management. On day one, I can tell you I don't see necessarily any reason whatsoever that we ought to be rethinking this, that we ought to be taking any major decisions on this. It feels like the right mix of elements. I trust that over the next few months as we try to figure out how to navigate the current environment, particularly driven by the COVID crisis. We will be tweaking here and there. We hopefully will find new engines of growth, initially within those three pillars that we talk about. But I do believe that as a conglomerate, effectively, which is what it is, we do hotels, we do real estate, we do town management. We actually benefit from being in those three sectors effectively, because some may have cycles that are very different from others. For example, if I read the numbers right so far, the real estate segment has held up significantly better than the hotel segment with the current COVID crisis. And of course, town management ought to be always a reasonably stable source for us of revenue and hopefully eventually over time profits. And therefore, it would make a lot of sense for me to be looking to build on those three sectors, to keep those three sectors, and to find even more synergies between those three sectors going forward.
Okay. And we have a question for you. Given your background from consulting, have you ever been in a situation like Orascom, given that the challenges that you've had to overcome? Have you ever been in a similar situation as Orascom Development?
Well, as an advisor, as a consultant, I've had the privilege of seeing a lot of these. In my years of consulting, fortunately or unfortunately, we've had a number of crises. I was obviously serving quite a large number of clients in the 2007, 2008 financial crisis. That was a big deal, where many of the systems froze completely for a couple of years. And where many companies found themselves in tremendous complexity, and we managed to devise, execute, build on a number of turnaround programs for a lot of these institutions. I was around also in the region here, obviously in the 2011 timeframe, when the whole set of events started happening in Egypt and also in the broader Middle East. Which led to quite a bit of financial and macroeconomic instability. And we worked through a number of these turnarounds also for clients, both on the public sector side as well as also on the private sector side. And of course, very recently in Egypt, we've been working through, as I said earlier, with the government and a number of companies, be they privately owned or state owned, through the crisis and complexity that has been going on right now in terms of the devaluation, for example, in Egypt that happened, and then the growth that comes on the back of it. So I've had the exposure for a number of these. To be very honest with you, one of the things that I always found in those three macro kind of disruptions that we saw is a couple of things. I think the first one is, in every one of these crises, there's an opportunity to reinvent the way we do our business. That tends to be much more effective ultimately, and sometimes more efficient, but always generating new revenue streams. And I think that's a very important dimension to keep in mind. And as I asked you a few minutes ago, all of you, and I hope to engage with many of you, we will need to creatively think about where our new revenue sources could be during the time of crisis, and what will we have learned in the time of crisis that might be revenue sources for us on a more permanent basis. For example, if we talk about places like El Gouna, right? So different towns that we have. How much revenue do we get today from secondary home sales and being in that space? How much revenue do we get today from everything that has to do with home improvement that we get versus leaving those revenue perhaps streams to other third parties? And what's the right balance to get there? Are there opportunities for us to go in there much more and find new revenue streams for us that are more stable, that do survive these difficult crises? I suspect the answer is yes, and I think it will be for us jointly to think through these. So that would be one of the things perhaps that we can think about.
Okay, and we have another question about digital transformation. How important do you see digital transformation is? Where do we stand as a group, and is there an option on group-wide solutions?
Yeah. Look, I think digital is transformation, and more broadly also advanced analytics transformation. Digital to me has at least three segments, if you will, right? There's the whole digital, which is internal processes related digital. So how much do we do internally that is purely digital as opposed to paper oriented or as opposed to being oral? And I think that's an important element, and we need to think about that. The second element is how much of our interaction with our customers, with our clients, do we do on a digital platforms and digital channels versus more traditional channels. And I don't just talk about, marketing communications, so us communicating to them. I mean actually sales that we do. I mean service and after sales support that we do. I mean everything on the hotel side. It has to do all the way from the very beginning of the reservation cycle all the way till the end of the cycle for any particular tenant or visitor or guest that we host. And then the third pillar is what I call advanced analytics, which is typically in the background servicing those two functions, which is how much do we have processes that are automated or algorithms that we devise and we design to make use and to optimize and to extract the maximum value from the sales or from other dimensions of optimization of cost associated with our operations as a whole. And I think, to me, that's what I define as digital transformation. Is it essential in any company? I think it's completely essential today. I don't know that we can do business in today's world without that. Where are we? I think I look forward to discovering with you where we stand on this and how aggressively we can push it. And also, frankly, how much learnings we can bring from different entities, from different operations, from different countries, and from the different businesses on the hotel side to the real estate side, etc. I really look to seeing a lot of cross-pollination that we can learn in that space.
Okay, we've got the same question from several colleagues. How do we plan to enhance the intra-relations between the different Orascom destinations? Internal relations, how do we make use of the experiences that we have across the destinations? And how do we work together closely across the different destinations? So right. I have a few questions coming around this.
Okay. Well, look, to me, when I first looked at ODH from the outside, and I say ODH purposely, it looked to me like a group that has a presence in seven different countries. Again, some presences are very deep and very strong, like in Egypt. Others are extremely light and still perhaps nascent. But to me, it appeared reasonably natural that there would be a reasonably extensive amount of collaboration and cross-pollination. And I think that can come in many different ways. The most natural and the easiest way to think about is around talent rotations that we do. So how much of our talent do we grow and nurture from within different destinations and different countries, and circulate that talent around so that we can benefit countries that may be a little bit earlier, a little bit later. That's one. The second dimension, I think, has to do with how much of the best practices and the learnings are we sharing. So, for example, if Switzerland, Andermatt, have developed very aggressive or very advanced analytics related to sales, how much are we taking of this and applying it to our assets in Oman or our assets in Egypt? That would be, for me, something that's very obvious, and we ought to make sure that we have a lot of that. Third, and to what extent are we really building a unique Orascom development culture that we can all be very proud of and that we can use as a language internally, so that when we're speaking and when we are thinking, we're always speaking and thinking and meaning the same thing. And I think that's one of the important things that we'll hopefully try to do as we try to build a common culture within the group that ultimately is a bit of an umbrella culture for the different destinations that will always have their individual character, and we should cherish and empower that individual character of the different destinations. But I think there needs to ultimately be a common culture, basic set of ways that we do business in, basic set of ways in which we communicate, a basic set of values that we all share, which I think would be very important for us to develop together. But again, I'm discovering, and you will tell me where we are and how we can improve all of these things.
Okay.
Maybe one last question.
One last question for you. So we've heard that you actually have hotels experience. If you can tell us more about it.
Okay, so you want to talk about my hotel experience? Yes, I do have some prior hotel experience. I did not say it when I explained a little bit my professional experience, but my very first job when I was 17, and I'm embarrassed to say I didn't start working earlier than 17, I probably should have, but my very first job when I was 17 was actually in hotels. And what happened then is I had just finished my Sanawiyya Amma, which is the high school diploma in Egypt, or the equivalent of the Abitur, I guess, in places like Germany. And I thought I had done extremely well. And I thought I had very good results, and therefore I felt a sense of entitlement for a very pleasant summer vacation. And I had that conversation with my family, and my father promised me that on Sunday morning he would take me to what is going to be a very pleasant vacation. He drove me up, he drove me down the street to a local hotel here in Cairo, and he delivered me from the back entrance and told me to go meet a certain individual over there, which I did. I was told on that day that welcome to the Sheraton Cairo, that happened to be the Sheraton Cairo, and that I would spend the next 3 months in the Sheraton Cairo working in housekeeping, which was an absolutely tremendous experience that I enjoyed. I ended up spending about a month and a half or 2 months in the Sheraton Cairo during that summer break, primarily cleaning toilets, changing sheets, doing all the cleaning that you need to do, and getting to know the internal operations of hotels, which again was an incredibly character shaping as well as also experience shaping experience. I eventually was promoted to the reservations desk for a few days, and ultimately ended up on the concierge and the front desk for a couple of weeks also. Unfortunately, that period was the period when there was quite a bit of turmoil in Kuwait. The Iraqis had just invaded, and so the Sheraton was overtaken with many refugees and people who came to Egypt. So my house cleaning and housekeeping tasks were quite, let's say, loaded. Most of the rooms were about 8 to 10 people a piece, and there was quite a bit of work that had to be done. But I tremendously enjoyed it, and I think it was a great experience for me. So that was my hotel experience and the extent to which I had some hotel experiences.
So. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I look forward to engaging with all of you very soon, inshallah. And maybe I'll just end with another last few words in Arabic if we're not yet disconnected, are we? No, we're still there. فكنت عايز اشكركم كلكم على ال 45 او الساعه اللي مضيناها مع بعض دي. انا متحمس جدا لحاجه لكم ان شاء الله، واتمنى ان يكون النبذه القصيره اللي عملناها مع بعض دي تكون مجرد بدايه مشوار مع بعض، وانه في المشوار ده هنتعرف على بعض، هنشتغل مع بعض، وهنتقرب قوي من بعض من ناحيه الحاجات اللي عايزين نعملها والاحلام اللي عايزين نحققها بالنسبه لاوراسكوم للتنميه. فاسمحوا لي ان ابقى اجي لكم ان شاء الله في الاماكن اللي انتم بتشتغلوا فيها، في الديستنيشنز اللي انتم شغالين عليها، وهسالكم اسئله كثيره، لان في الاول مش هكون فاهم كويس قوي اللي احنا بنعمله، بس هتساعدوني ان شاء الله في المشوار ده، ومع بعض ان شاء الله هنبني حاجه هنكون كلنا فخورين بيها ونعرف نشتغل معاها ونفتخر بيها دايما في مصر. شكرا، ونكلمكم قريب ان شاء الله.